close enough though. And let's see, there are slides up here. Well, anyway, let me get started. It really is a fantastic pleasure an honor to be here today to celebrate Alexei's 80th birthday and my first visit to Moscow. This trip I'm really looking forward to it as well. And hopefully my slides will be working now. There we go. Today, what I'd like to do is to share with you some of the research we've been doing, mostly around Chernobyl for the past few years. I need to start by mentioning that everything I will talk about was done in collaboration with my partner, Anders Mahler, at the University of Paris South. And of course, I should always acknowledge the funders to our research as well, especially the Center for the Charitable Trust. All right, let me see if my pointer works. It's not been activated. Is it in the right way? Well, anyway, I guess I'll have to run through this without the clicker. So we started working in Chernobyl in 2000, as I did, seriously. And next slide, please. And we started also working again, please. Back. This isn't good. We're always so dependent on technology. Anyway, we've also been working in Fukushima since July of 2011, and most of our work has been with natural populations of birds and insects, but also microbial communities and some plants as well. And we've also been working with a cohort of children just outside the exclusion zone in Ukraine to look at the impacts of radioactive contaminants there. And a key point that I want to make, and I try to make it every talk, is that we are independent evolutionary biologists, and our prime motivation for the research is in documenting adaptation and the impacts of elevated mutation rates on population processes. We're not activists in any way, although some of our best friends are. Let's see. Next slide, please. One more. So there are two documents that have really motivated the research that we've been doing. The first is the Chernobyl Forum Reports, 2005-2006, published by the International Atomic Energy Agency, where they suggested that the populations of many plants and animals have expanded in the present environmental conditions and had a positive impact on the biota of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and by implication suggesting that a little radiation may not be that bad for you. In fact, it might be good for you. They've also suggested that human morbidities in and around the Chernobyl affected territories were primarily the result of psychological stress and not anything to do with physiological or genetic responses. But in fact, there were very few data in support of this position, and really no data in support of the biological aspects. Next one, please. The second document, of course, that has been perhaps even more influential in guiding our work and leading us forward is this book by our own Alexei here, published in 2009. Alexei sent me some chapters from this book in 2007, and I was just amazed because we've been waiting for such a compilation of the Eastern European literature to come about, and I didn't think it was ever going to happen. And when Alexei forwarded this document, it really was an eye-opener. It's provided a lot of motivations for our studies of recent years. Next slide, please. And I don't expect you to read this slide. It's really just a list of the publications that we've generated in the last few years, and it's just to show you that we've been busy, and it's also to show you that you can access most of these publications. are simple. Birds, for instance, or mice, don't drink vodka, and they don't smoke cigarettes, and as far as I can tell, they don't get depressed. And so we have, and so we don't have to worry about these other additional environmental factors in terms of impacts. The other thing, of course, is that they have not been removed from these most contaminated areas. They're still living in these highly contaminated areas, and so they provide a good tool to investigate what the likely impacts are going to be. So the first question I want to address today, to share with you today, concerns this simple one. Very simple question that had not been addressed even 20 years after the disaster in Chernobyl. Nobody had really addressed this question with any rigor. And that's certainly, how has the abundance and biodiversity of the bird community, for instance, and other animals been affected by the events in Chernobyl? To get at this question, we've taken a kind of a unique approach that hasn't been used very much anywhere else. And it really is aimed at disentangling all of the various environmental influences that can affect the population of organisms. And what we do is what I call a massively replicated biotic inventory approach, where we basically go to hundreds of locations and count every organism that we see, focusing in this case mostly on the birds and the insects, but we take an inventory of hundreds of locations, 1,100 times in Fukushima, 896 times in Chernobyl. We measure everything about the environment. We measure the hydrology, the geology, the climate at the time, the soil type, is there water? All the environmental factors that also influence these plant and animal communities. Of course, we measure the radiation as well. And then we use geographical information systems approaches to combining multivariate statistics to generate predictive models of radiation effects on populations. And when you do this, you can look at the impacts of the radioactive contaminants independent of all the other environmental factors that might influence the populations. Next slide. When you do this, the patterns become very clear. And these are for Chernobyl first. First and foremost, the abundance of birds, in this case, is reduced by 2/3 in the most contaminated areas of Chernobyl. Next slide, please. The numbers of species, biodiversity, is less than half of what it should be in the most contaminated areas. It's not just birds that are affected. Next slide, please. We look at bumblebees. The wild bird bee populations are virtually extinct in the most contaminated areas. Next slide. Butterflies, the same. Most of them are gone in these areas of high contamination. You see the odd one, but not very many. Next slide, please. Spiders, the same. Next slide. Grasshoppers, the same. Dragonflies, the same. And of course, the question after we published these first papers dealing with birds and insects, the question came up, well, that's fine, but what about the mammals? I mean, we're a mammal. What's going on with the mammals? And it took us a while to come up with a way to look at the mammal populations and the mammal community as a whole without having to trap them. And it dawned on us at one point, let's go there, let's go to Chernobyl in the winter, and we can track the animals in the snow using their footprints. And from that, do some estimates of abundance and biodiversity. Next one. And sure enough, when you do this, the mammal population is significantly lower at the higher areas of high contamination. Although interestingly enough, the wolves are not showing the same pattern. Next slide. This past 2 years, we've also included trapping for small rodents, both in Chernobyl and in Fukushima now. And the basic pattern is the same, with many fewer individuals, in this case voles, in the more contaminated areas, and also a major impact on reproduction. They're much less reproductively active in the areas of high contamination. Next slide, please. And so now after doing all of these surveys, all these biotic inventories, we can safely say, with some confidence, that Chernobyl is not a wildlife haven, that despite the fact that there are fewer people there, or hardly any people there, there's still a major impact of the radioactive contaminants, again, in these more contaminated areas. You can see wildlife in the Chernobyl zone, but you have to go to the clean parts of the zone. And there are clean parts that you can use on there. Next slide, please. So what about Fukushima? And so we've been working now since July 2011 on the birds and the insects in Fukushima. Last year we started doing some more detailed work on the reproduction and survival of barn swallows. And this summer we initiated surveys of the small rodent populations, both in Fukushima and in Chernobyl. Next slide, please. And here's a map, again, it's hard to see, but what it shows you are the sites, the locations where we've done our 400 biotic, where the 400 sites where we've done our 1,100 biotic inventories. And they're in areas that are relatively clean and areas that are quite hot. This year we managed to get right to the gates of the nuclear power plant, so areas of very high contamination are included as well. Next slide, please. It's not just radiation that's causing damage to this area, lots of earthquake damage. And of course, many of the towns now are empty. People have left because of the damage. But this has provided, again, a unique opportunity to compare Chernobyl with Fukushima, and again, to replicate these studies in two different locations, two completely different events, to determine what similarities and differences. Next slide, please. Just looking at the birds in this case, what was really striking was the fact that we see the same basic pattern in Fukushima, with declining numbers of birds in the more contaminated areas. And what was particularly interesting was that if you take, there are 14 species of birds that can be found in both Chernobyl and in Fukushima, the same species of birds. When you compare those 14 species, the strength of the relationship, the strength of the effect of radiation is twice as strong in Fukushima currently as compared to Chernobyl. And this has led people to suggest that maybe there's been some level of adaptation. Next slide, please. That's fine. And so, so the question is whether or not Chernobyl, if there's been enough time in Chernobyl for populations of some of these birds to actually evolve resistance or not. I don't think so, but we'll get to that later. This slide right here is simply showing a comparison of our surveys of birds from in 2011 to 2012. And what each of these points represents is for an individual species and the slope of the relationship between radiation and abundance. And what this figure shows is that in 2011, there were quite a few species that had a strong negative impact, but there were quite a few species that were not negatively impacted as well. And there was even one species that was fairly strongly positively impacted in some way. But in 2012, many more of the species are negatively impacted, and the strength of this negative impact has increased from 2011 to 2012. So there's been a larger impact of radiation showing up in terms of numbers of birds in 2012. So the effects are ongoing and will continue. We don't know for how much longer, but they are continuing. Next one, please. And let's see this one. Next slide. Next slide. It seems that we have the wrong version. Next slide, please.